When is your husband finally divorcing you, darling? The sticky, cloying atmosphere from inside the room seeped out, and Ethan froze, eyes wide with disbelief. The raw ache in his throat, a phantom echo of coughed-up blood, remained vivid, yet the scars that had once marred his hands were gone. His legs felt whole and strong beneath him. Why the rush? You haven't divorced your husband either, have you? A husky voice chuckled. Oh, you tease. It's you I want, you know that. The panting breaths grew louder, more insistent. Ethan fought back a wave of nausea and slammed the door shut. This was his house, and in their marital bed, writhing in illicit pleasure, were his wife and his boss. He stared at his hands, slowly clenching them into fists. In his past life, Ethan had loved Serafina for a decade, their romance blossoming from college hallways to wedding vows. He had bent over backwards to give her everything she desired. Ever since their son's tragic accident, Serafina had changed. Ethan's every action was driven by a desperate need to see her smile again. He'd pushed himself to the brink, enduring stomach-churning nights of drinking with clients, all to secure deals and bring home bonuses for her. His life's ambition was simple, to build a happy life with Serafina. When she expressed dissatisfaction with her mundane job, begging him to help her join his company, he readily agreed. A woman shouldn't rely on a man, she declared. She needs to be self-sufficient. Ethan believed her. He'd even swallowed his pride, bribing his boss and enduring humiliating networking events to pave her way in. Serafina joined the company, but soon complained about the meager salary, demanding he push for a raise. As a mid-level manager, he felt inadequate in her eyes. Then, surprisingly, she landed a position in finance. He cautioned her against overworking, but she'd lashed out, her voice laced with scorn. You're just like all men, threatened by a woman who earns more. If you can't handle it, maybe we should just get divorced. Guilt gnawed at him. He apologized profusely, buying her the designer bag she'd been coveting, handing over his entire $10,000 year-end bonus. Blinded by love, he failed to notice the faint scent of cheap perfume clinging to her clothes, a scent that didn't belong to her. He'd been so naive, so willing to trust. Then, one day, Serafina appeared before him, a picture of distressed innocence, tears streaming down her face. Ethan, you have to help me. I'm your wife. It wasn't my fault. We've been together for 10 years. You're the only one I can trust. As a finance employee, she had made a serious error, one that threatened legal repercussions. Ethan held her, offering comfort, but he couldn't take the blame for her mistake. He gently pushed her away, turning to leave. She collapsed to her knees, a sob tearing through her. I'm pregnant. You can't abandon me. His steps faltered. It had been 2 years since their son was taken from them. He hadn't wanted to reopen that wound for Serafina, resigning himself to a life without children. But Serafina clutched her stomach, weeping before him, claiming she carried his child. He looked up, closed his eyes, and a long silence stretched between them. Ethan went to prison, convicted of financial crimes, sentenced to 2 years and 8 months. Ethan, what am I going to do? His mother had wailed, her face etched with despair. The weight of her grief pressed down on him like a physical burden. Mom, Serafina will be here for you, he'd reassured her. She's pregnant. These 2 years will fly by. You'll have the baby to keep you company. 2 years and 8 months did pass quickly. Winter's bite was sharp when he was released. No one was there to meet him. He called Serafina. The number was disconnected. He called his mother. The same cold, automated voice informed him the number was no longer in service. A chilling dread gripped him. Throughout his imprisonment, he had diligently studied, hoping to earn early release. Yet, no letters had ever reached him. Suspicion had flickered in his mind, but his mother was illiterate, and he dismissed his unease. He went to his mother's old house. A dilapidated wall, choked with ivy, was the first thing he saw. Mom, I'm home, he called out, pushing open the creaking gate. Dust billowed up, stinging his eyes. Mom, your Ethan is back. Young Ethan? Where have you been all these years? He turned to see Mrs. Peterson, their neighbor, broom in hand. Your mother. She passed away a year ago. She was calling for you in her last days. Ethan's legs gave way, and he crumpled to the ground, staying there until darkness swallowed the day. He searched for Serafina. Their marital home had been sold. A terrifying thought sparked in his mind, one he desperately tried to deny. He found a payphone and dialed Mr. Harrison, his former boss. It rang twice before a woman answered. Hello? My husband's in the shower right now. Can I take a message? In that instant, Ethan felt his blood turn to ice, a paralyzing cold spreading through him. The next day, a knife hidden in his coat, he went to Harrison Corporation. Rage surged through him, a primal urge to butcher the treacherous pair. But instead of vengeance, he was met with a gang of thugs wielding clubs, thrown out onto the street, sprawling at Serafina's feet. Why are you doing this, Ethan? Must you make everyone miserable? She sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. He spat out blood, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Why, Serafina? Tell me why. Serafina twirled a strand of her hair, her eyes cold and dismissive. Why else? Did you think I was in love with your pathetic self? I wanted his money, you fool. And you were terrible in bed, a boring, broken loser. Women crave passion. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Don't ever bother us again. Next time you cause trouble at the company, a broken leg will be the least of your worries. The men around her roared with laughter, some kicking him cruelly, one landing a blow to his inner thigh. Arg! Pain ripped through him, tearing him apart. Teach him a lesson, Serafina commanded, for sullying my husband's company. 10 years. He had known Serafina for 10 years, and never had he imagined the depths of her cruelty. Ethan, dear, what are you doing standing at the door? The memory dissolved. He looked at Mrs. Peterson, his neighbor, and forced down the hatred that threatened to consume him. It was Mrs. Peterson who had delivered the news of his mother's death in his past life. His mother was still alive. He mumbled a few polite words to Mrs. Peterson and hailed a taxi, his heart pounding with urgency as he directed the driver to his mother's home. The ivy was gone, replaced by vibrant flower pots bursting with color. His mother, spatula in hand, froze, staring at him. Ethan? What happened, son? A lump formed in his throat, and he rushed to embrace her, tears finally breaking free. Why are you crying, Ethan? Tell your mother, and I'll sort it out for you. He wept until his shoulders ached, until his tears ran dry. It wasn't too late. This time, he wouldn't be a fool. He scheduled a full medical checkup for his mother, asking Mrs. Peterson to keep an eye on her in the meantime. It was still early days, before Serafina and Harrison became openly entangled. If his memory served him correctly, Serafina was due for her promotion to finance director tomorrow. Ethan took a deep breath, opened his laptop, and ordered 2 hidden security cameras online. Honey, why aren't you home yet tonight? He opened the voicemail, and bile rose in his throat. How could Serafina so casually address 2 different men as husband? Staying at mom's tonight. Okay, could you transfer me some money? I signed up for another fitness class today. A muffled male voice drifted in from the background. Serafina murmured something to him, and then returned to the phone. Just signing for a delivery. Don't forget the money. The call ended. Ethan clenched his phone, a cold smile playing on his lips. In his past life, Serafina had become obsessed with fitness and dance classes. He'd been happy, thinking she was finally finding solace after their son's death. Without hesitation, he'd given her his bank card, encouraging her to take any classes she wanted. Now, he saw it for what it was. Grooming herself, perfecting her allure to please another man, to better facilitate her betrayal. He didn't transfer the money. In fact, he froze the card he had previously given her. The next day, he installed the hidden cameras in their bedroom and living room before heading to the office. As predicted, the afternoon announcement declared Serafina's promotion to finance director. Serafina sashayed forward, accepting the bouquet of flowers Mr. Harrison offered. Her saccharine voice dripped with insincerity as she addressed the room. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for your trust. I promise to work even harder and continue to strive for excellence. Mr. Harrison, his belly straining against his suit, chuckled heartily. I knew I hadn't misjudged you. Don't work too late tonight, Serafina. Life outside of work is important too. Serafina blushed, demurely lowering her gaze. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Harrison. Applause filled the room, but Ethan saw the knowing smirks, the veiled contempt in the eyes of some colleagues. How blind had he been in his past life? He had missed all the signs, all the whispers. Definitely sleeping her way to the top. Look at her, strutting around like she's won the lottery, completely oblivious to what people really think. One woman whispered to another in the coffee break area. Shush, be careful. She'll be whispering in the boss's ear soon. You'll be fired before you know it. The two women froze as they spotted Ethan, their faces paling. He offered a faint smile, tilting his head slightly. Careful what you say, ladies. Back to work now. The two women scurried past, heads bowed. Ethan reached for a cup, pouring himself a coffee. Honey, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. Get me a coffee too, 2 sugars. Serafina's voice, dripping with false sweetness, startled him from behind, and he flinched, scalding his hand with hot coffee. What's wrong with you? Aren't you happy about my promotion? Serafina sidled up to him, the cloying scent of cheap perfume and stale cigarette smoke clinging to her. Ethan recoiled, wrinkling his nose, stepping back. He had been so foolish, so utterly blind. Not just women blinded by love, but men too, it seemed. He looked at Serafina, her face plastered with heavy makeup, and his gaze involuntarily fell on 2 angry red marks on her neck. Serafina stiffened, her eyes darting away, a flicker of unease in their depths. She hastily adjusted her collar, pulling it higher. Oh, these mosquitoes were relentless last night while you were away. They feasted on me, she offered with a strained laugh. It was unbearable. Serafina, her upper body clad in a tight sweater, leaned in, wrapping her arms around his. Honey, I got promoted. You should be happy for me. Now we can save up faster for that beachfront house we always dreamed of. Ethan took a deep breath, pushing Serafina away, his expression hardening. Their dream of a beachfront house had been their shared vision since college, their first naive aspirations of a future together. He had been diligently searching for the perfect property, working himself to the bone to give Serafina the life she deserved. But some people, given too much freedom, became emboldened, mistaking kindness for weakness. Stay away from me. You reek of smoke. Serafina's eyes widened, then a brittle smile stretched across her lips. You know how it is, Ethan. Those men in my team are chain smokers. I'm constantly inhaling secondhand smoke. Ethan scoffed inwardly, turning away, coffee cup in hand. Honey, are you hiding something from me? Serafina's voice held a hint of uncertainty, but she still blocked his path. Why did you freeze my card? Did I do something wrong? He glanced at her hand gripping his arm. Those hands, once delicate, hands he had always shielded from any hardship, now bore 2 angry blisters. So, she had learned to cook, to play the doting wife, all to ensnare Mr. Harrison? Nice ring, he remarked dryly, his gaze fixed on the gaudy piece of jewelry on her finger, a new addition he hadn't seen before. Serafina flinched, snatching her hand back as if burned, then quickly reached out to grab him again. Just a cheap trinket, nothing special. You're not going to begrudge me even this little thing, are you? Ethan turned to face her, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Come home tomorrow, Serafina. We're getting a divorce. Mr. Ethan, your mother's condition is indeed serious. We strongly recommend a follow-up examination at the provincial hospital within the next 2 days. Ethan stood outside the hospital, exhaling slowly, a cloud of vapor in the cold air. Why? Why, even with a second chance, was his mother still afflicted with kidney failure? In his previous life, the first signs had likely already emerged before his imprisonment. But when he'd asked Serafina to take his mother for a checkup, what had she said? Mom's doing perfectly fine, don't worry. Oh, and Mom mentioned she'd like a bread maker. Could you send some money for one? Ethan's temple throbbed. He had been suffering from gastritis, bleeding internally from the stress of entertaining clients. Yet when he'd begged Serafina to take his mother to the doctor, that was her response. He'd blindly transferred $2,000. Only now did he realize the bread maker wasn't for his mother at all. It was another prop in Serafina's performance, a gift to curry favor with Mr. Harrison. As if summoned by his thoughts, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from Serafina. After their divorce conversation at the office, Serafina still hadn't grasped the reality. In her deluded mind, it was just a childish tantrum, a fleeting mood, a snap of her fingers, a flutter of her eyelashes, and he would come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. After all, in their 10 years of marriage, hadn't he always been the first to apologize, the first to offer an olive branch? He waited for the call to go to voicemail, then blocked her number. He booked an appointment with a specialist at the provincial hospital and took his mother for the recommended tests. The dialysis treatments were expensive, but his savings, accumulated over years of relentless work, were substantial. He wouldn't stay at Harrison Corporation any longer, and he certainly wouldn't let them continue to reap the rewards of his labor. He began calling nearly 200 clients, informing them of his intention to leave the company. In long-term partnerships, mutual benefit and trust were paramount. These clients were the backbone of Harrison Corporation's revenue stream. And, coincidentally, they were all clients Ethan had personally cultivated, one brotherly handshake, one shared bottle of liquor at a time. If he left, a significant portion of Harrison's clientele would likely follow. Serafina called again, this time on a different number. He glanced at his mother, finally asleep, and answered, "What is it now?" Serafina's voice was laced with impatience, bordering on aggression. "Ethan, what is the meaning of this? I just got promoted. What's gotten into you?" He could hear other voices in the background, hushed murmurs of people trying to mediate. Ethan's lips curled into a knowing smile. Serafina was calling from the office, deliberately creating a scene, playing the victim to garner sympathy from her colleagues. And he, the unsupportive husband, would be painted as the villain, condemned by the self-righteous moral arbiters of office politics. He calmly pressed the record button on his phone. "What are you talking about, Serafina? I'm thrilled about your promotion." Serafina paused, her tone shifting, becoming choked with manufactured emotion. "Then why do you want a divorce? What have I done wrong? I cook for you at home, burning my hands. I wash your socks. I cater to your every need. Isn't this what you want? For me to be a stay-at-home wife, forever subservient to you?" Ethan narrowed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "Serafina, I'm at the hospital right now. Is there anything you want to tell me?" Serafina opened her mouth, ready to launch into another denial, then abruptly fell silent, her voice catching in her throat. "What are you doing at the hospital? Has something happened to Mom?" Ethan laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "I didn't say anything about Mom, Serafina. How did you know it was about Mom? And didn't you tell me last time that Mom was perfectly healthy?" Serafina's intention was to utterly destroy Ethan's reputation, so she had deliberately amplified the call volume to its maximum. Beyond disrupting the office's work rhythm, everyone was now pointedly looking in their direction. If Serafina hung up now, she would appear guilt-ridden. She was caught in a self-made trap. Ethan pressed on, his voice steady and clear. "I called the city hospital's medical examination department. They said you never took Mom for a checkup. Care to explain that, Serafina?" Colleagues nearby, ears practically twitching, exchanged glances before turning their gaze back to Serafina, a mixture of curiosity and judgment in their eyes. Serafina, visibly flustered, fumbled to mute the call. "What nonsense are you spouting? I simply didn't trust the hospital you chose. I took Mom to a clinic run by a friend," she retorted, her voice strained. "Besides," she continued, her tone defensively high-pitched, "hospitals these days are all about money grabbing. Isn't it better to have someone reliable, a friend who knows the ropes?" Her words lacked conviction, her forced bravado transparently thin. City hospitals weren't trustworthy, but a friend's back-alley clinic was? The logic was laughable. Ethan let out a derisive snort. Perhaps you should also consult your reliable friend about determining the paternity of your baby. He ended the call, leaving Serafina standing amidst a sea of judging eyes, her face drained of color. What are you all staring at? Don't you have work to do? She snapped, her voice cracking, before stomping away on her now-traded flat shoes, the stiletto heels abandoned in favor of more practical footwear for her condition. I told you that woman was trouble, one colleague muttered, seducing a married man, no less. Ethan finally saw through her. If you ask me, women like that deserve to be publicly shamed. Another woman chimed in, her voice laced with venom. A male voice interjected, rolling his eyes. Oh, please. How are you so sure Ethan isn't the one fabricating stories, spreading malicious rumors about a woman? Maybe Ethan is the real villain here. A girl scoffed, her eyes filled with scorn. What? Did Serafina buy you off with a bottle of perfume? Don't you know that perfume was a freebie that came with Mr. Harrison's expensive cologne? The man's face paled, and he spun around abruptly, retreating to his workstation. Ethan hired a private caregiver to look after his mother and simultaneously began the arduous search for a compatible kidney donor. His mother was blood type B, incompatible with his own, but as long as a glimmer of hope existed, he wouldn't give up on saving her. Returning to the office felt like walking into a zoo. Everywhere he went, he could feel the weight of prying, gossiping eyes. He met their gazes head-on, refusing to shrink under their scrutiny. Ethan, keeping busy lately, are we? He fixed his gaze on Harrison's sycophantic deputy director, Mr. Davis, his eyes narrowing slightly. Mr. Davis, you seem to have a lot of free time on your hands as well. Perhaps deputy director duties are too taxing for you? If Harrison hadn't given the signal, this man, who had stagnated at the deputy director level for decades, would never have dared to provoke him. Mr. Davis's face darkened momentarily before quickly morphing into a smug grin. Mr. Harrison wants to see you in his office. Ethan settled deeper into his ergonomic chair, crossing his legs with deliberate nonchalance. Tell Mr. Harrison to come see me. The surrounding office fell into a stunned silence. Ethan watched as his colleagues stared at him, their expressions a confusing mix of shock, admiration, and apprehension. Bliss. Mr. Davis looked as if he had just swallowed something truly foul. A ripple of suppressed laughter escaped from a few nearby colleagues. Honey, what on earth are you doing? Haven't you caused enough of a scene already? Are you trying to humiliate us further? Serafina approached, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, the stiletto heels now definitely replaced by sensible flats. My cuckoldry is practically legendary, and you're playing the victim here? Ethan retorted, raising an eyebrow at Serafina's theatrics. He had even subtly enhanced his own appearance with slightly disheveled hair and a touch of paleness to amplify the wronged husband image. Impressive, he thought wryly. Honey, when are you going to swallow your pride, your fragile masculinity? Serafina continued, her voice laced with a calculated blend of desperation and accusation. Isn't this all just a ploy to get the company to fire me under the guise of pregnancy? Well, I am pregnant, and it is your child. I told you this wasn't a good time to be pregnant, given the company situation, but you know what you did. The office was completely silent, every eye glued to the unfolding drama. Ethan slowly stood up and clapped his hands twice, the sound sharp and echoing in the stillness. I had no idea you had such a talent for stand-up comedy. Serafina, her face ashen, took a step towards him. Ethan, can't we just stop this? Please. If you don't want me working, I'll quit. I'll resign. Okay? Is that what you want? She reached out a trembling hand towards him, but Ethan instinctively recoiled. Then, in a move that was either incredibly clumsy or expertly calculated, Serafina's feet seemed to slip out from under her. She stumbled forward, collapsing dramatically at Ethan's feet. Ack! A horrifying smear of bright red blood blossomed from Serafina's lower abdomen, spreading across the pristine office floor. Serafina gasped, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, her face bone-white. Ethan stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, chilling realization. Serafina's hand, fingers contorted, clamped around his ankle with surprising strength, her knuckles white against her pale skin. "Ethan, help me. Please. Save our baby. I know you hate me, but the baby is innocent. Please save us." A cacophony of voices erupted around them, the office buzzing with shocked whispers and exclamations. Ignoring the sudden flash of phone cameras and the growing number of recording devices pointed at him, Ethan dialed emergency services, his voice calm and steady amidst the chaos. After relaying their location and the emergency, he carefully scooped Serafina into his arms and rushed towards the elevators. Heartless monster. Look at him, all puffed up with his macho pride. He clearly doesn't want that baby. He's deliberately driving his wife to miscarriage. I work in this company, and I'm a first-hand witness. This man, Ethan, is completely indifferent to his wife miscarrying. Outside the hospital emergency room, Ethan quickly called the caregiver, instructing her to keep a close watch on his mother. He then sank into a chair, staring blankly at the vitriolic comments and accusations flooding his phone screen before switching it off, the glow fading to black. So, Serafina was willing to sacrifice her own child, to risk her own health, just to ruin him. When would she finally see Harrison for who he truly was? Blindly believing herself to be cleverly manipulating Harrison, she was nothing more than a disposable pawn in his game. Ethan contacted the police cybercrime unit, initiating action against the online harassment. He meticulously screenshot every defamatory comment, every hateful post, every piece of online abuse, preparing for legal recourse. Serafina lost the baby. Her body, already weakened, suffered greatly. Even after regaining consciousness, she remained unrepentant, unleashing torrents of abuse in her hospital room, driving nurses away in tears. Then, in a final act of desperation, she started live-streaming from her hospital bed. "I'm just seeking justice for my child," the caption read, stark and accusatory, superimposed over her pale, tear-streaked face. The lurid, blood-chilling headline sent a cold shiver down Ethan's spine. Justice for your child? He thought bitterly. How about justice for me first? Online, the accusations against him intensified, the deletion of comments only fueling the flames of outrage. Outside the company building, a group of women's rights activists had gathered, brandishing banners and placards, demanding justice for the unborn child. "Reject male chauvinism," one sign screamed, the words flapping in the wind like a stinging insult. So Serafina's plan had escalated to self-harm and infant loss, all to tarnish his name. Ethan took a deep breath and accessed the security camera feed on his phone. Long before taking his mother to the hospital, he had linked the hidden cameras to his mobile device. In the 2 days he'd been away from home, Serafina and Harrison had been indulging in a clandestine affair, their illicit rendezvous unfolding in the very marital home he had painstakingly paid for. Twisted sheets, whispered endearments, stolen kisses, all captured in crystal-clear digital clarity. "Does this feel even more thrilling, Mrs. Harrison?" Harrison's voice, thick with lust, echoed from the small phone speaker. Ethan watched the grainy footage of the entwined figures on the screen, a slow, mirthless smile curving his lips. "This isn't my fault. I can only expose your wrongdoing because you chose to commit it in the first place." He stared at the USB drive in his hand, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. In this society, women's safety was a deeply sensitive and complex issue. Even the slightest hint of potential harm could be amplified and sensationalized by public opinion. It was a carefully orchestrated game, a performance of victimhood. Serafina was expertly exploiting this societal sensitivity to attract public attention, while those ignorant of the truth readily condemned him, the villainous husband. If he were to release the evidence now, collaborating with the police to set the record straight, would it inadvertently make the fight for genuine women's safety even more challenging? "Serafina, what are you doing? Hurting others ultimately hurts yourself." She wasn't just harming him. She was undermining the very women who believed in her, the women who were raising their voices in her name. Ethan followed the police through the hospital's back entrance, bypassing the throng of protesters and reporters at the front. Inside, Serafina was still live-streaming, gesticulating wildly, spittle flying as she ranted. A policewoman approached, speaking to her gently, trying to reason with her. Serafina simply coughed weakly, her face pale and drawn, skillfully projecting an image of fragility to her online audience. The live chat exploded with comments, a torrent of abuse and threats directed at Ethan, calls for physical violence and worse. Ethan stepped forward. Serafina finally looked up, her eyes widening as she spotted him. A spark of manic energy ignited within her, and she swung the phone around, pointing the camera directly at him. It's him. He's the murderer. He killed my baby. Ethan glanced at the tens of thousands of voices clamoring for his blood in the live chat, and then calmly produced the USB drive. Serafina, enough is enough, don't you think? Serafina's lips curled into a triumphant smirk, oblivious to the contents of the USB. You dare threaten me? I have thousands of people behind me. Do you think I'm afraid of you? The policewoman stepped forward, attempting to gently take the phone from Serafina, but Serafina shrieked, recoiling violently. You're all in cahoots. You all want to harm my baby. Her performance of feigned madness was punctuated by a chilling, almost gleeful smile. That smile faltered, then froze completely as her eyes landed on the printed photographs Ethan held out to her. You. Serafina scrambled to her feet, lunging at him, desperation etched on her face. Give it to me. Let me tear it up. Ethan watched calmly as Serafina frantically ripped the photos into shreds, tossing the useless fragments into a nearby trash can. He shrugged, his voice quiet but firm. I advise you to stop this charade, Serafina. You know who the father is, don't you? And you should also know who is truly responsible for your miscarriage. A flicker of pain crossed Serafina's face, quickly masked by a return to her manic performance. She rolled her eyes dramatically. What nonsense are you talking about? You're my husband. Who else could the baby's father be? There are more photos, Serafina, and videos. Videos where we can hear everything you and Harrison are saying. Every word. Serafina, do you even realize the trouble you're in? Serafina's gaze shifted from the shredded photos to the USB drive, the manic light in her eyes flickering, dimming, then suddenly flaring up again with renewed defiance. So what if I had an affair? Is adultery a crime? She spat, her voice laced with venom. It's Ethan's fault for being so useless. If he were a real man, would I have needed to look elsewhere? The policewoman stepped forward, holding up a document. We can't arrest you for adultery, no. But, following an investigation, we have evidence that you were implicated in financial crimes, specifically embezzlement of company funds. The moment the policewoman finished speaking, Serafina's eyes widened in terror. She lashed out, kicking the trash can over, sending the shredded photos scattering across the floor. She pointed her phone at the policewoman, her voice rising to a hysterical shriek. You're lying. I haven't committed any crimes. I just became finance director. I haven't done anything wrong. Ethan chuckled softly, folding his arms across his chest. I'm curious myself. How could you embezzle such a significant sum of money so soon after becoming finance director? Serafina's face turned ashen, her hand gripping the phone trembling violently. Impossible. I just had an affair. I didn't commit any crimes. I'm innocent, she screamed, her voice cracking. The policewoman gently but firmly restrained Serafina. Ethan turned and left the room, pausing at the doorway to exchange a final glance with Serafina, her eyes wide and bloodshot with fear and dawning realization. Serafina, this is what self-inflicted ruin looks like. Thank you for your tip-off, Mr. Jiang. But how did you know about the financial irregularities within the company? The police officer asked later. Ethan clapped the officer on the shoulder, a faint smile playing on his lips. Just follow the trail, officer. Mr. Harrison has a few more surprises waiting for you. Having settled matters at the hospital and compiled all the necessary evidence, Ethan released a public statement detailing the orchestrated smear campaign and the true nature of events. He initiated legal proceedings against every online harasser, every defamatory comment, every sensationalist news outlet that had fueled the firestorm. It was a clean, decisive victory, a perfect counterattack. The only loose end was Harrison himself, who had vanished. After resigning from Harrison Corporation, Ethan had taken a significant portion of their client base with him, crippling Harrison's business. Harrison, naturally, wouldn't accept defeat lying down. His only recourse was to destroy Ethan, and Serafina was his chosen weapon, a disposable pawn in his vengeful game. Harrison had a wife, children, a carefully constructed public persona as a respected entrepreneur. He wouldn't risk it all to elevate Serafina to the position of his official mistress. He certainly wouldn't risk scandal, but fate, in its cruel irony, had intervened. Serafina was pregnant, a complication that threatened his carefully maintained image. The child had to go, and Ethan, conveniently, provided the perfect scapegoat. Following the script of his previous life, Ethan knew that after becoming finance director, Serafina would have discovered the company's financial black hole. Harrison, in turn, would have promised her a life of luxury and security, contingent on her helping him plug that gaping financial wound. Ethan snorted derisively, uploading all the evidence of Harrison's tax evasion and financial fraud with a single click. In his previous life, he had taken the fall for Harrison's crimes, and he remembered every detail, every manipulated contract, every fraudulent transaction with crystal clarity. Long before Serafina had even conceived her miscarriage and blame Ethan's scheme, he had already cornered Harrison, pushing him to the brink. Harrison's desperate gamble was to use Serafina, to have her falsely claim Ethan as the father of her child, to paint him as a callous, patriarchal brute deserving of public condemnation. But Ethan had anticipated his moves, contacting the police preemptively, deftly sidestepping the carefully laid trap. Harrison, cunning and ruthless, would never surrender easily. So, he sacrificed his final pawn, Serafina. Serafina became the fall guy, the patsy. As finance director, her name was on documents she didn't fully understand, signing off on transactions she barely comprehended. Transactions that were now revealed to be the core of Harrison's elaborate financial fraud. Serafina, inexperienced and naive, had been easily manipulated by Harrison's smooth talk and empty promises, bought off with a gaudy diamond ring. Ethan remembered the way Serafina had flaunted that ring, a stark contrast to the simple wedding band he had given her, the one she had always dismissed as cheap and insignificant. He lowered his gaze, tracing the faint indentation on his left ring finger, a ghost of the wedding band he had worn for 10 years. Even when the sizing was slightly off, he had stubbornly worn it, a symbol of his unwavering commitment. Even a cheap beer tadpole ring, a memento from their early days, was still tucked away in a box of cherished memories. His love had been priceless, but Serafina had been too blind to see its worth. He settled back into his rocking chair, gently swaying. It is what it is. Deserved consequences. After being cleared of any involvement in Harrison's financial crimes, Serafina was still detained for 2 months due to outstanding debts. Upon release, her physical and emotional state was shattered. The miscarriage had taken a heavy toll, leaving her weak and broken. A shadow of her former self, she haunted his company's entrance like a ghost, her body racked by a persistent, wheezing cough, her eyes bloodshot and feverish, her back perpetually hunched. "Honey, you still love me, don't you?" she croaked, her voice dry and desperate. "We've been together for 10 years. How can you just stop loving me like that?" Serafina, a pathetic specter of her former self, blocked the entrance to his company, a broken woman clinging to a delusion. The vivid memory of his past self, legs shattered, writhing in agony on the cold pavement, flashed before his eyes, merging with the present image of Serafina kneeling before him, begging. A cold smile touched his lips as he subtly retracted his polished shoe, avoiding her grasping hand. "What is there about you that is worthy of love?" As security escorted Serafina away, Ethan watched the sun break through the clouds, its rays piercing the gloom. Heaven has its own justice. Harrison was apprehended, thanks to Serafina's unwitting assistance. Ironically, their paths crossed again in the most unlikely of places. a seedy red light district dive bar. Serafina, ostracized and unemployable, had sunk into a deeper abyss, and Harrison, desperately evading the police dragnet, had sought refuge in the same shadowy underworld. Their explosive confrontation spilled out onto the street, Serafina's shrill voice, laced with betrayal and fury, echoing as she accosted Harrison, grabbing at his thinning hair, spitting accusations in his face. Harrison, his face flushed, his bald patch gleaming under the streetlights, roared back, his voice thick with rage. "Get off me, you wretched woman. You crazy bitch. You dared to deceive me. You ruined my entire life." The scene unfolded in a rundown red light district. When the police finally located Harrison, he was hiding in a dingy back room, clad only in a pair of threadbare boxer shorts. "Stop taking pictures, or I'll sue you all," he bellowed, his face contorted with fury and shame. A passerby cleared his throat and spat contemptuously at Harrison's feet. "Filming you is an insult to my phone. Rot in jail for 800 years, you piece of trash. Anyone who could stomach going near that thing deserves a medal," another bystander jeered. Online, the public spectacle of Harrison and Serafina's downfall became a viral sensation, a modern-day morality play unfolding in real time. The pair's courtroom battles were legendary, each appearance a new eruption of accusations and recriminations. During one particularly heated exchange, Serafina coughed up blood, a dark, alarming crimson. The saga took another dramatic turn. Serafina, it was discovered, had been poisoned in the red light district, likely a casualty of its dark underbelly. Following the threat of Serafina's poisoning, the police raided a clandestine, illegal establishment in the red light district, and, deeper within the shadows, they unearthed Harrison's incriminating fingerprints, linking him to a web of even more serious offenses. Charged with a multitude of crimes, Harrison's prison sentence ensured he would remain behind bars for the rest of his natural life. Serafina, rushed to the hospital and narrowly rescued from the brink of death, survived, but with half her body paralyzed by a stroke, triggered by the poisoning and the overwhelming stress. Karma, it seemed, had come full circle. In their previous life, Serafina had been responsible for his crippling injuries, and in this life, retribution had arrived with chilling precision. A police officer informed Ethan that Serafina had requested to see him one last time. Feeding his mother a spoonful of chicken soup, Ethan chuckled softly. "Aren't you afraid that seeing me now might just finish her off?" The officer merely shrugged and left him to his thoughts. Ethan continued his relentless search for a kidney donor for his mother. Hope remained faint, but hope, however fragile, persisted. 3 months later, a compatible donor was found, and his mother underwent a successful transplant. Serafina, meanwhile, remained alive, a broken shadow confined to a hospital bed, her entire world reduced to the 4 walls of a sterile room. Watching his mother regain her health, the balcony of their small apartment overflowing with vibrant potted plants, Ethan found a strange sense of peace. He almost hoped Serafina would live to be 100. For Serafina, in her current state, existence itself was the ultimate torment.